Hello, everyone. Brian Platt back again for more. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. So I want to talk today a little bit about housing as infrastructure. And I think, even I'll admit to this too, that, when you first think about infrastructure, you're working for a city, you don't think about housing as being part of that list. You think about the obvious things, the things outside of the curb. But behind the curb, it's a whole nother story. And you think about what infrastructure does and what it's for. It's to support people. It's to improve quality of life. It's to give them access to the services and resources that they need to live a healthy and safe and independent life. Housing is absolutely supposed to be on that list. We don't really think about it that way, though. And we're running a little bit late, so I'll try to run through it. But I think there are some interesting things that we're working on in Kansas City that a lot of other cities are doing as well that can sort of be things that you might want to think about and take home to wherever you're going to. So I'll sort of frame the issue that we're facing here in Kansas City. And I can't really see the screen, but so we've got... The COVID pandemic has exacerbated housing challenges across the country. It is not just a Kansas City thing. Homelessness is up. Affordable housing challenges are becoming much worse. People who are living paycheck to paycheck are being pushed out into the street and having to make a lot of tough choices. And in Kansas City in particular, we have about 2,000 people who are homeless. We've got a few hundred who are what we call street homeless, meaning they are living in a car or literally in a tent under a bridge somewhere. And I'm sure if you've been around this country in the last year or two, you've seen it much worse in a lot of places. San Francisco, Portland, Washington, D.C., these are places I've been to in the last few months. And some neighborhoods are almost recognizable just because of how much more presence you're seeing all over the place. It's not just any one of those cities. It's not just us, it's everywhere. And the shelters are at capacity, of course. Sorry, I'm going to try and move over here if I can. Am I allowed to do that so I can read this? I'm just going to move a little bit. We're good. Or can I use one of those mics? I'm just going to use one of these. Hello, can you hear me? Okay, great. This is a little easier for me. Some of the challenges that we have with homelessness that are unseen are what are the other costs, what are the resulting costs from those from homelessness and what it causes economically and the burden on other resources. So what ends up happening is people who are homeless, when it gets cold, they call 911, they end up in an ambulance, they end up in a hospital, they look for places to go, they try to spend nights in hospitals, setting fires under bridges. And then inevitably something happens and the bridge catches on fire, and then you've got all these extra costs that are ancillary to the problem. So when we think about homelessness and the challenges that are immediate, you don't always think about the actual larger costs that come from this sort of thing. We go into parks, for example, and we're cleaning up homeless camps, and it costs tens of thousands of dollars after the fact, finding these camps, trying to relocate people into housing, try to take care of them, and provide them the service and support they need. And so there's already a cost. There's already a cost on our infrastructure from this, just from doing nothing. And so that's, I think, another reason why it's important to think about providing services and support as infrastructure. It's an investment in your city. It's an investment in protecting your infrastructure, maintaining other types of infrastructure, and providing exactly what people need to live safe and healthy lives. Affordable housing has been a huge challenge in Kansas City and across this country. Rents are going up. I mean, this is a story that you've probably been hearing for a long time. In Kansas City, just as a snapshot, half of households in Kansas City, half of all the households in Kansas City are less than 80% of the area median income. So that to us says that there are a lot of people who are cost burdened by their housing costs, meaning they're spending a lot more money on housing than anything else, and they don't have disposable income to do other things, to have social activities, to pay for health care, after school enrichment for their children. And there are 20,000 households in Kansas City spending more than 50% of their income on housing. That's a huge amount. So think about if you're spending half of your paycheck just to keep the roof over your head, you're making choices to go to the doctor, to do the other things that you need to make sure that you are safe and healthy and protected in your life. And it causes a lot of other stresses and challenges, of course, in people's lives. The supply of affordable housing units that we've got in Kansas City is just obviously not meeting that demand. And this is a narrative and a story that's true for many cities across the country. So when we think about housing as infrastructure, back to some earlier points, it's absolutely something that cities need to be providing to residents and to communities to make sure that they've got the opportunity to have all the resources and support that they need. It's a part of quality of life, and there are a lot of needs there as far as housing goes to build housing. Financing, obviously, is a big part of it, but also the maintenance and the upkeep of that housing. One of the challenges that you see in cities around the country are older housing. Maybe it wasn't the highest quality. It doesn't last that long, and it falls apart. And a lot of that lower quality housing ends up being the affordable housing. So you've already got people who are living cost-burdened lives because of their housing costs, and now they're living in a house that is unsuitable or unhealthy for them to be in. And so it's a vicious cycle where they can't make the repairs to their housing and they can't get new housing because they're income restricted, they're at low income, and then they're stuck in this housing that just keeps getting worse and worse. And so that's a big challenge for people. And then the staffing is another part of it. The infrastructure of the resources and the tools and the support and the information and personnel that people need to help them solve their problems. So just going to go through a couple of ideas that we've been working on and pursuing in Kansas City that a lot of other cities are doing too, and it's sort of some creative ways that we're thinking about how to provide infrastructure, housing infrastructure for the people of Kansas City. We started the city's first standalone housing department. It's a sign and a show of good faith to people who are housing insecure and who have housing challenges that we mean business. We have staff dedicated for the first time to helping you solve your housing problems. We created the first ever tenant advocate office. So a lot of affordable, actually most low-income individuals and families are renters and tenants. And so we've created an office to help those people directly solve their problems and deal with the things that they've got going on. A lot of the challenges stem from just not knowing what your options are and what your rights are and what tools you have available to you as a renter and as a tenant. And some of that is as simple as understanding what's in your lease, what you can ask of your landlord, and what resources and other tools are available through the city and through other sources. Just somebody who you can call and ask questions. And really, that is a big part of it. Communication is a big part of it. We also have hired the city's first ever homelessness prevention coordinator. We now have dedicated staff focused on finding solutions to helping people resolve their homelessness. And just as a side note on homelessness, one of the challenges that cities all face is what to do with people living in tents. And a lot of people see tents in their neighborhood, and I've got some walking distance from my house in Kansas City. They just want them gone. They don't understand what it means to be living in that tent and to figure out how to resolve that homelessness. And what happens is if you shoo people away who are living in the tent, they just go somewhere else. What we're trying to do, we're taking a different approach and trying to figure out what it is we can do to get those people off the street, resolve whatever issues that they've got going on. It could be mental health issues. It could be needing paperwork. It could be finding a job. It could be so many things, but it's all different. Every person's a little different, and it's not just a simple approach, but the solutions are pretty obvious once you start to talk to people, and it just takes a little bit of time and money and effort. And so rather than just saying, we're just going to move you to the next place, you can't sleep in this park, but I can't tell you where to go, and I got nowhere for you to go, let's figure out a way to take these people off the street, to give them the services and the support that they need, and then end that homelessness for that person and get and reduce the actual down the road costs that I mentioned before about having to deal with healthcare issues that have gone unremediated because they've been living in a tent and they didn't get a checkup, and they've had some issues with drugs and whatever it's going on in that tent, and then the cleanups that have to happen afterwards and the hospital bills and everything else. that comes down the road from that. So now we've got staff that are trying to be proactive and get people off the street and create that infrastructure and that pipeline and those tools and the resources that they need to get off the street. Kansas City has a really interesting asset. We've got a lot of land. Kansas City is 318 square miles. It's the size of New York City at about 5% of the population. Just a lot of land, very spread out. And so we're trying to use that land and leverage it to solve some of our problems. The city owns 3,000 vacant lots and homes across the city. And we're trying to find a way to turn those into affordable housing. The best way to reduce housing costs, obviously, supply and demand, is to create more supply. Everyone's housing costs go down if there's a lot of it. But also, we need to put some frameworks in place to make sure that those new housing units are truly affordable, that they're not just cheap the day you build them and sell them, that they are restricted at levels so that they're only accessible to people who need the lowest level of rent and ownership costs. And so that's actually coming out pretty soon. There's a picture here. This is actually not the same hotel, but we're thinking about creative ways to use underutilized assets in our city and turn them into new types of infrastructure that meet the needs that we've got today. So just converted a few months ago a hotel into transitional supportive housing. So that means we're taking those hotel rooms, which if you think about it, it's a home for somebody, and they are now housing units, temporary free housing units for people who we then directly provide services to, support to, figure out how we can get them off the street, how we can find them permanent housing, and move them into the next option. 49 rooms in that hotel. We've helped hundreds of people get off the street and resolve their homelessness permanently. We've resolved drug addiction issues, family issues. You know what? A lot of times people, as I mentioned before, because of the pandemic, it's not like they're not trying. They just get stuck in a place and they just need a place to sleep for a month or two and find the next thing and go to the next job interview, and they're off on their way. And this is a great place for that. It's not a tent, it's not a shelter, it's a humane, private, personal space, and it's helped hundreds of people already. And it's a small investment in a really interesting and unique type of infrastructure. An old hotel that was already not being used. It is now serving hundreds of people a year at this point. We've started a housing trust fund, an affordable housing trust fund. We actually took a good amount of our stimulus dollars and invested $25 million into it over 2 years. Those affordable housing trust fund dollars are financial infrastructure to be the foundation of creating new affordable housing units. What we're using it to do is subsidize the costs and the rents for affordable housing units all over the city. Next week, actually, we're hopefully going to approve the first 450 or so new affordable housing units to be created by this new trust fund, about $8 million of that initial pot. And that's huge. When you talk about needing to find and create housing units that are affordable, that are restricted to a certain income level, so that those who are most in need, those that are most cost burdened by their housing, have a place to go where the rent is not going to be 50% of their income, as I mentioned before. We've also distributed $40 million in rental assistance dollars to people who are having a tough time paying their bills. And this was also stimulus money, but super important. We prevented countless evictions. We stopped literally in the moment of the energy company or the water, well, not really the water company, but water services being shut off in the moment. Found the cash for them to make sure that they could continue to have power and water and all the other types of utilities that they might need, and to pay their rent and to pay their bills so they can continue to live their lives and just get back on their feet. And we've helped thousands of people stay in their homes because of this. And so in the future, we're looking at some other things too. We're looking at reframing our development incentive policies to make sure that as new developments come forward, that there's some amount of affordable housing being created and maintained in those new projects. And I'll note here that this is not a unique idea to Kansas City. Did it in New Jersey, but cities across the country, pretty much every city has a policy like this. It's important to note that there's probably not a perfect policy for every city, and there's not a single gold standard. It's going to be different for every city. It's different for Kansas City compared to even the neighbors around us. And actually, we had a policy that we implemented a couple of years ago, and to be honest, it didn't work. So we're changing it, and we're making improvements and amendments to it. And I think that's important too, that, it's an interesting place to be in housing policy, in that needs change and evolve, and market conditions change and evolve, and you've got to be responsive and reactive to what's going on around you, and know in the moment that, maybe a hotel is a good thing to do to convert to transitional housing, but maybe in 2 or 3 years, we don't need that anymore. Maybe it's something else. It could be some other problem that we didn't know about. And that's exactly, I think, for those of you who were in the government world in 2019, we couldn't have predicted a pandemic would have had all these impacts and caused all these challenges. As a city official leading a city in New Jersey, we weren't really even thinking about homelessness that much. It was a problem, but it was not top of the list. When I got here to Kansas City, it became priority number one, to be honest. I mean, there were encampments all over the city, all over. And I did not expect that to be the case. And no one in Kansas City, when I asked them, what are the priorities when I was going through the interview process, nobody listed homelessness as even in the top 3 or 5. And it became such a different dramatic transformation as I went through that process because of the pandemic and the results of the economic impact there. When you think about infrastructure for housing as well, job training and professional development is key. What better way to make sure that people have their own means and economic vitality than to give them the training and the skills and the resources they need to get a good job and to keep that job. One of the big things we're working on is a new emergency low barrier homeless shelter. This is just basically a place where we can bring anyone and everyone and take them off the street immediately. And it's something that cities are not thinking about so much, but it's a big need. I just mentioned earlier about the challenges related to people living in tents and where do you bring them. You need a place to bring them. And we've got a goal of creating 10,000 new affordable housing units in the next 5 years. And that's a very aspirational, lofty goal. But what is the point of setting goals if they're not aggressive and aspirational and meeting the needs of your residents? Don't set goals. We're trying to think of ways to not set goals where we're just going to hit them just because that's the trajectory we're already on. We've got to reframe the way we're thinking and approaching all this and make sure that we're making changes and making transformative change. So that is the end. I know you're all very sad, but if you want to learn more about some of the things that we're doing, kcmo.gov is our main website, /housing. We've got some good information on there, and I'll be around to answer any questions you got. Thank you so much.